Welcome back to Officeology. Today we're going to look at the third class in our Old Testament exegesis curriculum here at Mid-America Reformed Seminary. This class is entitled Interpretation of Revelation in the Exilic and Post-Exilic Periods, but it also entails the poetical books. And in fact, a major portion of this class is learning to translate and interpret Hebrew poetry in the Psalms, wisdom literature, various parts of the prophetical books, and then learning to interpret and actually preach those texts. And so while we do have a fairly lengthy discussion about the biblical theological contours of exile, because it's an important theme in the Old Testament. It's one that Deuteronomy is already preparing for. There's types of exiles that take place in the Pentateuch, but there's that message of many of the prophets is anticipating the coming exile of Israel and Judah due to their rejection of the Lord's ways and of His covenant. And so we unpack some of that as well. But really, a major portion of the class is devoted to Hebrew poetry. And looking at the Psalms, in teaching this class, and something that I inherited from my colleague, Professor Mark Vanderhard, is this awareness of how deceptive the Psalms can be. And I don't mean that negatively. Psalms strike many of us as just so easy because we're used to reading them and we're used to singing them in our churches. But to translate them well and to preach them well takes a lot more work than a lot of people think. And so this class really delves into the literary features of the Psalter and how to go about preaching them in an effective way such that we don't just have sort of a generic psalm sermon that we insert different psalms into, but one that pays close attention to the texture and the poetry of each individual psalm. It even comes in trying to wrestle with how to make thematic statements that are fitting for a particular psalm without being too generic in our preparation. We also look at the wisdom literature as well and delve into sort of the backbone of wisdom literature, the book of Proverbs. We've done some roundtable podcasts about wisdom in the Old Testament and wisdom in Scripture. But the wisdom books are really important for understanding sort of the Christian pilgrimage even today. And so it's a class that really exhausts our understanding of all the poetry that we find in the poetical books, yes, but even in other places of the Old Testament. And specifically, I'm thinking of books like Isaiah, which are laden with poetry. In fact, some of the early scholars of Hebrew poetry did most of their research in the book of Isaiah. But there's other places, too, where there's poems that are inserted into narratives. We think of the Song of the Sea in Exodus 15, the Song of Deborah in the book of Judges, number of inset psalms that we find in the books of Samuel. We find this kind of stuff throughout the Old Testament. And so this class is really able to delve into that. Something that we see in this class that relates also to what we are trying to do as a seminary here at Mid-America is this learning in community, learning in an interdisciplinary way. Now, learning in community, on the one hand, we are committed to in-person learning. We have explored the use of technology to do virtual learning or to do distance learning, and we have come to the conclusion that we are most effective and we serve the church best when we offer an in-person education and when we encourage students to take advantage of an in-person education. And that's why we've really never made any movement toward distance learning here. It's because of that community aspect that we find so important. And one real tangible way we see community playing out is the close-knit nature of our learning community here, especially among the faculty. Now, we don't have a faculty that is so large that we don't know each other. We have a very intimate faculty that gets to know each other quite well. And we meet not just for our faculty meetings, but several times a month for coffee and prayer and just conversation. And that enables our faculty to really cross-pollinate, not just good relationships, though we pursue those and we enjoy those, but even really a learning and cross-pollination between our academic disciplines that takes place regularly around here. And so in this class, for example, as we're doing wisdom literature, we're also tapping into our classes on ministerial studies about counseling people toward wisdom. Or we're tapping into other kinds of classes that invoke wisdom, like ethics. And so there's much overlap taking place between the different disciplines here at the seminary, the different departments, and our exegesis courses. And one way even the Old Testament classes contribute to that is not only by helping the students see connections between what we're doing in exegesis and what they're doing in their other classes, but even assigning texts that they might be surprised to find in an exegesis class. I think, for example, of Geerhardus Voss's Redemptive History and Biblical Interpretation volume. He has an article in here on the history of covenant theology in the Reformed tradition. And I've assigned this for exegesis classes, even though some might say, now wait a minute, that's a historical theological essay. And my point is exactly, we're not doing exegesis in a vacuum. In fact, so much of the work that I'm indebted to, whether it's Al Wolter's work in this particular volume here, or Craig Bartholomew's ongoing voluminous corpus of very excellent theological and exegetical research, is that our work in exegesis is very much interconnected with other kinds of convictions we have. And that really is what we're about here at Mid-America Reformed Seminary, a distinctively confessional Reformed approach to these topics. And the way that plays out is through an integrated and robust interdisciplinary approach that we have as faculty and that we have as a learning community here at the seminary.